Hi there, it's Lerald, and today I'm going to talk about the spec-specific Azerite bonuses for tank classes. I previously made a summary video covering how the Azerite Trait system works so far, so check that out if you want a refresher. So let's jump right into Death Knight. The Death Knight trait is called Deep Cuts, and it adds about an 18.7% increase to Heartstrike's damage, and heals for about 11.5% of the damage it deals. Unfortunately, it only works on 3 or more targets, which requires, obviously, that you're in AoE, and that you have Death and Decay active. Because of those constraints, on top of everything else, determining how much you're actually going to cast Heartstrike in AoE is a complicated endeavor that's definitely beyond the scope of this video, but just for comparison, this is less than half of the healing provided by the artifact trait Blood Feast, and it only works in AoE. The bottom line is that this trait just isn't very good. Any amount of extra self-healing is always going to be helpful, and adding AoE damage to Death Knight makes their greatest strength even stronger. But it's totally worthless. Totally worthless in single target and 2 target situations, and really not worth that much defensively even when it does work. For Demon Hunter, Revel in Pain adds a 5915 point damage shield to the end of Fiery Brand. Fiery Brand is a 40% single target damage reduction cooldown. The shield is actually affected by versatility, which makes it 6567 points, about 24% of max health. If you use it on cooldown, which obviously isn't advised, it's worth about 0.36% of max health per second, so quite a bit more than the Druid, or any of the other class bonuses, actually. It's also worth noting that you can spec into Burning Alive to cause Fiery Brand to jump into extra targets. That doesn't affect the shield size or cause you to get any extra shields or anything. It has no effect on this trait at all. Tacking an extra defensive bonus onto a defensive cooldown can be overkill, but this is tuned to be impactful. It is the strongest of the 6 traits in single target, but that's assuming you use Fiery Brand on cooldown, which is extremely unrealistic. In practical scenarios, it's still one of the better defensive tank traits, but probably not the absolute best. Let's move on to Druid. Heartblood makes Mangle increase the next heal you receive by almost 1% of max health. Mangle has a 6-second base cooldown reduced by haste and occasionally reset by gore, so the average cooldown on it is around 4 seconds, which makes this worth about 0.24% of max health restored per second. If you don't get healed in between Mangle casts, it won't stack, it just simply overwrites, so that is a small issue there. Overall, this is a small bonus, but it's consistent, and plays really well with the rest of Druid's high health, high armor toolkit. It's also passive and boring, which, again, fits really well with Druid. Boiling Brew increases Keg Smash damage on targets that are burning from Breath of Fire by about 5.5%. It heals for 83 points per Keg Smash, which is around 0.33% of max health. Very small. Keg Smash's base cooldown is 8 seconds, it's reduced by haste, so the average cooldown's around 7 seconds. This makes the heal worth 0.047 health per second. But wait, it gets worse. Breath of Fire's duration is 12 seconds, and its cooldown is fixed at 15 seconds, so only about 3/4 of Keg Smash casts will have Breath of Fire active. So this is worth 0.035 health per second. Almost nothing. There is one silver lining on this really bad trait. The effect scales linearly with multiple targets, so if you have 2 targets, it's just twice as powerful as it was against 1. 3 targets, it's 3 times as powerful. So on. It's very good for offense, which I appreciate, but overall it's really weak defensively. It would be the worst one in this list, but hey, DK does literally nothing against 1 or 2 targets, so yeah. Alright, Paladin time. Bulwark of Light makes Avenger's Shield grant a shield worth 1.6% of max health. Just like the Demon Hunter shield, this shield also scales with versatility, so the shield was actually worth 453 points, about 1.8% of max health. Avenger's Shield has a base cooldown of 15 seconds, it's reduced by haste. Dodge, Parry, and Hammer of the Righteous all have a 15% chance to reset it as well. Assuming a conservative 10-second cooldown, it's worth about 0.18% of max health per second. Paladin is in the unique position of actually having 2 usable bonuses. This is probably unintended, but the rep bonus actually works for protection as well. Avenger's Might grants 58 mastery while Avenging Wrath is active, which translates into about 3.3% block chance and 0.55% more damage reduction from armor when Shield of the Righteous is active. Overall, I'm not a big fan of tying a small defensive value into an offensive cooldown, and it really doesn't compete defensively with Bulwark of Light. It does provide a slight offensive value, so that's cool, I guess. Overall, when thinking about Bulwark of Light, it's a pretty good bonus. It provides a decent amount of consistent self-shielding. With the loss of artifact traits and legendaries, most Pally Theory crafters that I'd heard from kind of felt like the class had taken a huge step backwards in terms of Avenger's Shield having any defensive value at all. This makes it feel like it's at least a somewhat worthwhile defensive button again. Alright, Warrior time. Deafening Crash makes casting Thunderclap against a single target deal an extra 28% damage, and grant a shield worth 1.7% of max health. This shield, like all the others, scales with versatility, which made the actual shield value closer to 1.9% of max health. Thunderclap has a base 6-second cooldown, and it does scale with haste, but with haste values as they are on the alpha right now, the usage rate will probably be right around every 6 seconds, which means it's worth 0.3% of max health per second. The biggest drawback of Deafening Crash is that it only works in single target, and while that is pretty unfortunate, it's a really good bonus for offense and defense in those single target situations. If I had to choose between being good in only single target or AoE, I would definitely choose single target. Obviously I would want both, but single target's the more important scenario. When you consider the most impressive, powerful, dangerous boss fights throughout WoW's history, both in raids and dungeons really, very few of them are extended ad fights. They're usually long, complicated single target fights, and this bonus is going to do a lot for you there. I had considered ranking all of these traits against each other and trying to kind of create a list, but because they're such a small part of the overall tank balance picture, I think that would be misleading. Instead, I'll just sort of give you my brief insights on how I feel about the tank balance picture right now, as we're moving from Legion into Battle for Azeroth. Druids are still the best defensive tank, and all of the rest of the tanks are pretty close to each other, except for Brewmaster, who is lagging way behind. Monk is really scary to tank on the alpha right now, but I have hopes that there are more tank balance changes that will come along in due time, and I look forward to breaking them down once they do. Use the comments section if you have questions, like and subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. Thanks for watching. Bye.